All right, well, it looks like a considerable amount of the forces have gathered. I see that we would also like to welcome our presenters for today. We have uh, uh, Father John Mitchell, who's going to be presenting for Constitution and Canons and for the Committee on Resolutions. We have, as part of the resolutions presentation, also Reverend Jana Wason, who's with us to help talk a little bit further about that first resolution for the mental and spiritual health ministry. And we have our own CFO, Gary Kamath, who will be doing the budget presentation. So I think with all of us being gathered, we will go ahead and get started. So I'd like to open this up with just a couple of prayers, one for the diocese and one for our meeting today. So let us pray. Oh God, by your grace, you have called us in this diocese to a goodly fellowship of faith. Bless our bishop and our bishop-elect and our other clergy and all of our people. Grant that your word may be truly preached and truly heard, your sacraments faithfully administered and faithfully received. By your Spirit, fashion our lives according to the example of your Son, and grant that we may show the power of your love to all among whom we live. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
And for our meeting today, Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel for the renewal and mission of your church. Teach us in all things to seek first your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right, and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Alrighty, well, again, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We have a lot of valuable information to impart, so without further ado, we will go ahead and start off with Father Mitchell and the presentation on Constitution and Canons, and then on to resolutions. So, Father John, it's all yours.
Okay.
Would you like me to share my screen?
No, it's not necessary, I don't think.
Okay.
I think I will simply go through it. I'm assuming that you can hear me. I always like to double check. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And the only other thing I guess I'd like to double check with everybody then, if you could just kind of give me even a, visual thumbs up or whatever. All of the documents that we're going to be dealing with today are on the website for the Diocesan Convention. Does everyone have access to them? Thumbs up? Yes. Okay, it's looking like by and large everybody does. Oh, I see all kinds of thumbs up coming up even. Very, very good. Okay.
Okay.
So proceed, please.
We'll start with Constitution and Canons. It has been a few items of interest have come up this year, which are reflected in the report. And the easiest way to understand everything that is proposed or has been discussed is, in fact, to go online and actually take a look at the report. Simply describing it is one way, and I will try, but I encourage you to go to the website and take a look. We have divided our report into a variety of sections or parts. The first one is simply a response to the fact that after the 80th General Convention, one of the responsibilities that we have is to look and see whether or not there's anything that was required to be done as a result of actions from General Convention. And this year, at least from my perspective, fortunately, no. Nothing needed to be done to conform either to our Constitution or our canons. The second part is clarification as much as anything else. We have in our Constitution for the diocese, provided for having those who are elected as deputies to the General Convention to hold their office until their successors are elected. You've no doubt heard language like that before, but it doesn't really make sense in our case because our deputies continue to have to work. It's not just after the convention. They work because they come back to report to us. So the proposal is to change that provision of the Constitution in Article 10 so that the service continues to the close of the diocesan convention following the general convention for which they were elected. Now, this was already been adopted last year at our 22 convention. So this is the second reading of the same provision. And this is a resolution and a change which is being recommended by Constitution and Canons. In respect of electing a bishop, we have three different sets of proposed amendments. The first one involves two things. First of all, it is a question of what happens, which we have not had for some time, the possibility of electing a bishop coadjutor. That is one who serves alongside the diocesan bishop pending taking over as diocesan bishop, or a bishop suffragan. And the practice in the polity of the church, which we propose to make clear, is that you begin this process by essentially making sure that the election is going to be accepted in the broader church, as opposed to simply moving ahead. Now, that is to have a majority of the standing committees of the church and the bishops consenting to this process. The likelihood is this is going to become explicit in the TEC canons in due course. It certainly has been practice which we are conforming to. The other initial set of changes is to be clear about what the different roles are between the standing committee and the sitting bishop, the diocesan. And it was a little less than clear in some places, although it was worked out. Who starts what? Who starts off by calling for the election of convocational members for the search committee, et cetera. And so that is also included in the first part to make that clear. A matter of clarification as much as anything else. The second part for changes to Canon 9, and this all relates to Canon 9, is a fairly simple one. And that is to make it clear that once the search committee has actually, and this is reflective of experience from this last time that we've gone through, once the search committee has published its own results of its search and work and consideration, that we should be moving on to having it be in the responsibility of the transition committee. And what's happening in the proposed change to Canon 9 is simply to say that once this has been published and announced, that the transition committee takes on its responsibility for everything from, well, for meet and greets, introduction of candidates, et cetera, going forward. The third section, and that again, both of those are being recommended for adoption by the Standing Committee on Constitution and Canons. The third set are proposals that come out of the search committee, and they would change the nature in several respects of how we deal with independent nominations, nominations which come after the process involving the search committee has been completed. The proposals were several. They involved having nominations come from more people and more convocations. They involved having requirements of written responses in the proposals. They limited the amount of time during which all of this could occur. And the issue that the Committee on Constitution and Canons has is that this is being looked at on a national basis. There's an existing task force looking at this whole question of how we do elections. And since this would be a fairly significant change, and since this is also being looked at by the Episcopal Church generally, the proposal will be to move this particular change, but to have it referred back to the Standing Committee on Constitution and Canons for further study and examination, particularly looking at what's going on in the broader church outside of the diocese. So that will be proposed, but it will also be suggested that it is, or recommended that it be referred back to the Standing Committee. The next one is mechanical as much as anything else. You'll recall that couple of years ago, we changed the election of the Board of Missions from being in the spring of convocational meetings to being in the fall. And the change, which comes out of the Board of Missions, and I see some Board of Missions folks here, in order to make it, instead of having that person immediately take office, which would be right in the middle of the time that the Board of Missions is actually doing its work, is to defer it to the beginning of the year so that they will have completed their work, and then these folks will then, assuming there's a change, would then take office at the beginning of the year. And okay, the next one, my pages are out of order, I apologize. The next one is an interesting one. It is, again, that's being recommended for adoption. The last one, which is also being recommended, or not next to the last one, recommended for adoption, is involves the composition of the Cathedral Major Chapter. For a long time, it has been required that the members of the clergy would be 4 presbyters, that is, 4 priests. The reason for that had to do with the constitution of the cathedral itself. This has been pointed out, and the chapter went through the process this last fall of amending its own constitution so that it now simply says members of the clergy as eligible to be members of the major chapter. And having done that, we can now make the proposal, which we will be making and which we will be recommending, that this provision in Canon 49 be changed so that it says 4 members of the clergy and 4 laypersons. We're bringing ourselves up to date in large part. I had one more, which is actually a little bit out of order, which is a clarifying point actually suggested by the good Phyllis, dealing with the compensation for clergy housing. And it's simply to make it clear that we'd made provision for what happens when a clergy person owns their house as their primary residence. We had made provision for other housing allowances, but the one thing that we never really spoke about explicitly was what happened if the clergy person on their own rents a house. And we are essentially changing the canon so it is dealt with the same way as if you actually go out and own or buy your own house. Those are the changes. Once again, the changes to the canons need to be proposed generally by December 1st of any particular year. So if you have further things that you want to change, mark your calendar. It will be December 1st. Again, as I said at the beginning, I think it's important to note that the easiest way and most effective way to really understand all of these is to go online and take a look at the document. It's document number 3, which explains the details, has the language and the explanation behind each one of these changes. And I will stop there for a moment before going on to the work of the Committee on Resolutions.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions for John on the Constitution and Canons piece?
Okay.
Not seeing any.
Let's move on for a second to, and I'm just delighted that Jane is here. This makes life easy for me. This improves my emotional and mental health, as it were.
Jane, you're muted.
I said, thank you. That's the first that anyone is thrilled that I'm here. Good. I'll put that in my book of memories. Thank you, John.
We all are. Before I turn it over to you, though, let me just go through briefly. The Committee on Resolutions has posted on the webpage its preliminary report. And the report shows what's been proposed to convention by January 15, which is the deadline for typically for resolutions to come to the committee. Anything that is not proposed by then to be considered by the convention requires the action of the convention, on the day of. So what we have are 3 resolutions. The first one, Resolution 2023, which Jane will address, is to establish a pastoral mental health and spiritual health committee for the diocese, which will have a variety of responsibilities. I will leave those to her. The second one is to remember both the victims and survivors of the pandemic. This is the 3rd anniversary. Yeah, amazing. And the third one, 2023, is to remember the victims of the World Trade Center. Actually, more than that. It's September 11, 2001. We are coming up on the 22nd anniversary, and this has been a burden and a labor for the last 22 years. So once again, that resolution will be presented along with the one on the other 2, the one on coronavirus and the one on a new committee, which Jane is going to explain.
All right. That's my signal.
That's your
signal.
signal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What we now are referring to as the MASH committee, the Mental and Spiritual Health Committee, has been previously a group of 10 individuals, clergy, lay professionals, and laypersons, who are focusing on what we believe is an essential issue for not only for individual parishes and the diocese, but the whole country, but we think has been especially brought to life during the pandemic, and our need to be safe by being away from being removed from the society at large, and perhaps too much isolated with each other. But the Mental and Spiritual Health Committee proposes that the various activities which were overseen by in separate places, by separate individuals and groups, such as the Warm Line, which was for clergy and sought to address anxiety and to use the services of first responders and people who especially were used. Again, so much of this has been brought to the light by the pandemic. So it included the Warm Line, which was a line that clergy who felt they needed a little help with their mental and spiritual health could call and be referred or be helped by the person they were talking to. Also, various mindfulness workshops that we have been held. Also, what has been come to be called safe church training, which began, interestingly enough, I've been trying to think of how many years ago it was. It was more than 25 years ago. I was the first trainer, safe church trainer. And that was really suggested and highly pushed by the church insurance company, who said to us, and I'm paraphrasing this broadly, if you don't hold trainings to raise these issues about the safety issues between congregants, especially youth and women, but not exclusive to them, and clergy, and anyone decides to claim that a wrong has been done them, then if we don't find evidence that you have addressed these issues through trainings and bulletins and readings and so forth, we will not back you. Now that's, again, a broad paraphrase, but that's what brought them to light. And most people came in those days kicking and screaming because they assumed that what we were doing was accusing them of being perpetrators, of being people who could not be trusted with children, and especially people who worked with youth, be they as far removed as custodians and sextons and church parish secretaries and so forth, to youth ministers and Sunday school teachers and other people. So anyway, that was what was. Also, the pastoral response teams, which were sent to congregations who were in some emerging crisis situations, and a group would be sent to them to work both with the clergy and the lay persons. So all of these were sort of coming or happening on their own without an overall overseeing body to coordinate them. So our resolution, the MASH resolution, is to, first of all, affirm the importance of good mental and spiritual health. The second was to establish an ongoing and permanent pastoral mental and spiritual health committee to coordinate all that I mentioned before, to oversee and develop programs to promote good mental and spiritual health in the diocese and in the community and church at large. And we propose to look at 5 areas. First, to the continuing education events, which could be held. For example, we held a short one at clergy conference, but they wouldn't necessarily be only for clergy conference, but for a general audience of the church, to gather and disseminate mental health resources, including mental health practitioners, mental health conferences and information, books, articles, any of the resources that would be helpful for people who either were in a mental and spiritual health crisis at the moment or wanted general information, and certainly clergy who might want to prepare for people who would come to them for assistance. Then also, as I mentioned before, safe church training oversight, and to address emerging congregational crisis situations using the pastoral response team, which already exists, as do all of the things that I mentioned, with the exception perhaps of the information about mental health resources available. But many of these are already happening: safe church training, a pastoral response team, and so forth. And in order to sort of test if this was just a topic that sprang out of our minds, we did bring up this issue at the last clergy conference, and found that there was indeed a good deal of information by the participants there on us establishing this committee and continuing our activities. So that's where we are. Any questions? Oh, you're crazy, what are you doing this for? None of those? Very good. I am our chair. I am not the chair, by the way. The chair is my good friend and fellow seminary attender, the Reverend Gregory Wilson, who's the vicar in Swedesboro. So you can get in touch with him, you can get in touch with me, you can get in touch with Canon Joanne Izzo, who functions as our liaison. So any of us might be able to respond to your questions if you have any in the future.
Great, thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, it helps to be old and experienced. I've been here in this diocese since the dawn of time, when the dinosaurs roamed the earth.
And wise in years as well. So thank you so
bless
much.
your heart. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, then I guess we will go ahead and move on to our budget presentation, which will be done by our CFO, Gary Kameth. So Gary, please take it away.
Thank you, Phyllis. Just like to give a brief presentation, but let me give you a brief background also. On behalf of the Budget and Finance Committee, Jonathan would have presented this in the but he has some conflict with his schedule, so he can't make it today. But he did present for last two times. This is the third pre-convention hearing, and we have one more left, which is scheduled for Monday, February 13th at 7 p.m. That Jonathan will be back for that. Before presenting the budget, I would like to give you a narrative as to how we got here. And there is a lot of things going on behind the scene. The Finance and Budget Committee met in December 2022 and in January 2023. As usual, many meetings were held. The budgets were reviewed, budget allocations and budget lines were reviewed, and there were a lot of requests made by budget requests made by many committees, many ministries, and a lot of deliberations were held. Finance and Budget Committee met at least 5 or 6 times with the budget presentations. All of the budget presentations were reasonable, sound, and robust. Unfortunately, given the revenue constraints that we have this year, it was clear that we could not begin to fund all the requests that were received. After a few deliberations and at the end of first run, we had a loss of about $1.7 million, and that's the budget deficit, which was completely out of the realm of consideration. After some more intense deliberations, Finance and Budget Committee reduced its deficit to $1.5 million, which was still not a reasonable amount to consider and to present to the Diocesan Council. So we ultimately engaged Bishop Stokes in the further conversation of the budget. Decision was made to hold the budget line items with no greater than the amount approved at the 2023 preliminary budget by last year's convention, unless there were other obligations or commitments which would prevent us from doing so. This approach reduced the deficit to $1.3 million and resulted in the budget that was then presented to the diocesan trustees, for their consideration for funding the deficit. And normally we would have gone to diocesan council first for the approval, and then to diocesan trustees for funding. After much deliberations, diocesan trustees noted that the $1.3 million request was approximately $580,000 higher than the anticipated under the 2023 preliminary budget that was approved at the last year's convention. The trustees did approve the $1.3 million funding request with the provision that the next $580,000 in proceeds from sale of church properties to be used to reimburse the trust funds for the differential rather than those sales being directed to the Mission Renewal Fund as it would have been normally be. This 2023 revised budget was then approved by the Diocesan Council and will now come before the convention, and now we'll be presenting that. And just to give you a caveat, for the 2024 budget that you'll see that 2024 budget was not approved with the intent of deliberating with the Bishop-elect Reverend Canon Dr. Sally French, and then with the larger community, and having a special convention at the end of this year for the approval of the preliminary 2024 budget. I also, briefly want to tell you that there is a lot of conversation we could make with regard to this budget, but due to the limited time, that there are some increases in revenues, decreases in revenues, and increases in expenses. So I will go through those increase and decrease, so that way, so you'll have the overall some brief picture. So I will share the screen. Okay, can everybody see the Excel spreadsheet or budget? Yes. Okay. If you look at the overall budget, I'll go through some of the highlights like I mentioned. If you look at revenues, the first line one, the marks of mission pledge, and you will see I'm mainly going to talk about the revised budget, the column AT, and I will compare that to the preliminary budget for 2023, that's line column AO, and you'll see on the column BA, that's the difference. And mainly I'll discuss with those differences so that you'll get an idea. The first line, line 1B, that's the third line from the top, you will see that actual 2022 actual is about $2,818,000. So even though preliminarily we budgeted $3 million, we reduced that to a more realistic number, and also based on what we received from Markham Mission Ask, that we think $2,816,000 is a more reasonable number. And that's a significant decrease. That's about $184,000 decrease from what's originally in our preliminary budgeted. And I'll talk about line 6 later after we go through all the budget. And basically, this is to fund the deficit if we want to have a balancing budget. And lines 6A, B, and D are more like the grant from trustees to make the budget balancing. So here also, if you look at from preliminary budget of 487, you'll see that we requested almost $1.2 million, or total of actually 769 that we requested in 2020 2023 preliminary budget. We're requesting here of $1.3 million. So we'll go through the rest of the expenses, and you'll see the differences or change in the expenses. And the first line within the diocesan priorities in the expenses is the diocesan mission congregation. And that, if you look at the preliminary budget, had the 475,000 budgeted, that had to be increased to 570,000. That's about a $96,000 increase. And basically, the request was much higher than that, actually. And the diocesan council had to look at the budget and approve only 570,000, which is 96,000 higher, but much less than what they requested. And this also in a board of mission, sorry, I meant the board of mission. They went through intense deliberations and a few meetings they had, and they had to, it's a hard choice to approve or not approve some of those things. And so they came up with the 570,000. That's a significant increase within the budget. And also some of the decreases you'll see are either requested by the ministries, or we looked at the actual 2022 budget, and if that was much lower, we changed the budget line to a lower amount, either based on the request or based on the last year's expenses, actual expenses, and we anticipate maybe lesser expense based on that. So I'll mainly go through the increases, but budget line number 20, the Episcopal Church, here this is actually based on the actual calculation of our actual marks of mission revenues that we received. And the few other lines, dividends and few other lines. And this is based on the calculation, that's about $7,500 lower. Like I mentioned, the other areas they requested, many of them requested higher amounts, and they had budget presentations, and there's, like I said, intense deliberations on those things. Next line, like you see, youth activities and congregation development. These are all, like I mentioned, either lower amounts requested or based on the past experience. And here, if you look at line 205, that's a much, that is a brand new line. Many congregations, needed urgent support with regard to transition of clergies, and they needed coaching and other support. And here we felt that was like all of them, this is a budget that need to be the budget line that need to be approved. So that $8,000 is a new line. And next budget line 210 and 211. These are Committee on Diaconate and Deacons Council. These are more like more of reallocation between two lines. And actually, two of them combined, there was a $25 reduction, but they're more of a reclassification between the two lines and not really an increase in any line. And next item you'll see is the General Convention and ECW Triennium. At the last General Convention was held in 2022, and it was held in Baltimore. And the next convention that will be in 2024, and it's in Louisville, Kentucky. And Baltimore, which is much closer, so there is less travel and related cost. But next year's convention will be, like I said, Louisville, Kentucky, and there will be a lot more travel and other cost related to that. And so we increased the budget, to come up with the actual reality that there is a 10,000 increase in the budget. Next item you'll see is more with the diocesan staff. and related items. And here there are a lot of transitioning happening for next year. The first item you'll see is the Bishop of New Jersey. Here there's a bishop-elect, and the bishop, there is a transition of about 3 months between April through June. And that transition includes about the cost related to that transition is about $70,000. The next line is the CFO line. Here, there was the budget amount of about $100,000, but due to the market condition, the actual would be $22,000 higher. And the next item is this is a canon missioner for Black ministry, and if you look at the 22, that was more of a stipendiary position. And here it was approved in the last convention to be a full-time position, and there is an increase in total of about $96,000 in this line. Next item is the overall diocesan staff. Here we have 3 long-term staff positions. Long-term staff are leaving us this year in June. So we are anticipating a overlap about a month and a half to transition the knowledge and overall train and redistribute the workload. And we're anticipating increase of about $45,000 related to that. And then overall employment taxes, health insurance, and pension related to all diocesan employees and administrative staff. There is an increase of actually $30,000 related to that. But just to let you know, there is even though there was a mandatory COLA increase for the clergy members, there is no COLA increases for any of the diocesan staff. And this was deliberated. Some people mentioned that's not reasonable, but to hold the deficit to a lower amount, we have to do that. So there is no COLA increases in any of the staff positions this year. And next, the search committee and transition committee. The search committee job is complete, but the transition committee is now taking over. And so these 2 lines are more like reallocation that originally when we budgeted, we didn't realize when the search will be complete and transition will be starting. So based on the actuality now, there is a shifting of cost to transition committee, and there is an overall increase of $10,000 with those 2 lines. And that's basically the overall, you will see the overall increase from the preliminary budget to the final budget. There's a $332,000 increase. And you saw the $185,000 decrease in the revenue that gets to the $500,000 and change. And that's how, even though the loss or profit you'll see as a 0, and that's the cost that you do see that in the top that diocesan trustees giving us through the grant to make the budget come to a balancing budget. Any questions on the budget?
Nancy, I see your hands up. Why don't you go ahead and unmute?
Hi, this is the very first time I've ever looked at the diocesan budget, so please excuse my question if it is naive, but we are challenged within our own congregation what an appropriate withdrawal from our endowment is. So I don't know whether there's a corollary at the diocesan level with these trustee grants, if the amount that you're taking out, and you just alluded to, you know, an extra plug basically to fill to meet the budget. Is there a correlation between how much you're taking out and what the balance of these trusts have?
That's a very good question. And also, just to let you know, I'm looking at the budget first time myself because I'm new to the diocese.
Thank you.
So no problem. Thank you. And we welcome questions because that's one of the purpose of this pre-convention hearing. So thank you. And I'm sure there's a lot of other folks have the same question. So mainly, that's one of the reasons we had to meet many times. And we did not do the COLA and other things. And also just in the 2024 budget, we didn't approve for that reason because we wanted the budget, the bishop-elect to look at that with the with the community discussions to look at that to see if there is any directions that we want to change or any changes we could make. But here, that's one of the reasons also we went to the diocesan trustees to see if the budget, we knew that this was still a higher amount, even though from the original budget, we came down a much bigger number. And also they requested, because this is about 580,000 higher than the usual draw we do, they requested that from the future sales of the property, that the funds from the future sales usually go to the mission congregations, so the diocesan mission, but they wanted to directed towards 580,000 towards the trustees to make up for the additional draw. So a lot of consideration was given, and that request was made, and not to approve the 2024, not to look at the 2024 budget now or approve it now. And so it is still similar to after the 580,000 going in there, we're anticipating few church sales during this year. And like I meant, maybe I didn't mention, the new church sales, if they're combining with other church, that money goes to them. This is only purely new sales, which is not associated with any other churches, will go towards the trustees, the 580,000. And after that, that will be going to the mission. So a lot of conversation went towards that. And we do realize that this is not a reasonable or healthy amount to take out.
If only our congregation had property to sell, I'd be in better shape. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. I think I see Jane Owason physically has her hand up. Jane, did you have a question? And you're muted.
Technically, I can't raise my hand, so I'm doing what I can do. I'm wondering about a situation where a ministry asked for money last year and was not given what they asked for, but then this year were asked to be comfortable with that amount. We're not going to get what we asked for this year, but we're asked to be productive with the amount we got last year, but the amount we got last year was not what we needed. So what kind of situation do we find ourselves in?
No, that's a excellent question itself. And actually, at the time of the budget requests for the mission congregations happened, there were, the committee deliberated a long time, and they divided the committee, between 3 or 4 groups to come up with the, separate independent thinking on how much to give for which congregations. And keep in mind, many of the congregations came with the request. And we, they also discussed as to the, there is always, we would like to approve all the budget requests, keep that in mind. But there is limitations based on the revenue that we have, and we don't want to take more than, more than that amount. As you could see in the budget, with the 95,000 higher amount, we still have a huge deficit. So from that, we divided the group into 3, the committee into 3 or 4 groups with the 3 or 4 people into each groups, and independently came up with different amounts as to, based on, they have a full discussion with all the ministries' request, And based on all that knowledge, they come up with an amount for each one of the congregation that amount was requested. They looked at the past request they made in a past few years and the improvements they made and what are the requests they have and discussed with the whole committee. And they also had the presentation from those groups. So from all of that, they came up with an amount, each group, and then all of those groups, 4 groups combined together, they looked at their own individual allocations and came up with that final 570,000. That was actually between 550. They wanted to cap it between 550 and 575,000, and they came up with that number from, like I said, many intense deliberations, that's still about $96,000 higher than what we anticipated in the preliminary budget. I don't know if that helped out with your question.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. It is, may I clarify that I'm not talking about a church. I'm talking about one of our ministries, one of our line items here, not a church. And if I may paraphrase what I think you said, we just have to take it. I don't want to be crude and say like it or lump it, but we just have to be satisfied with what I have, what we are getting. Is that what you're saying? Is there no recourse? Is there no questioning of the amounts at all? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Like I mentioned, we do have limitations in total overall budget.
I'm well aware of that. I've been a CEO and I know you can't spend what you don't have.
Yes. And Phyllis, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
I mean, yeah, I guess I think you basically covered it. And I think, Jane, your summary was fairly succinct in that at this point in time, we really don't have any other recourse. So it is almost like it or lump it. But I also want to, uphold what, what Gary was saying in that, there is opportunity for conversation, presentation, within the whole process that finance and budget does throughout the budgeting season. And that was, at the end of that process, we were faced with a $1.7 million deficit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so that was where, we, had to, and it was together, it was between the bishop, the trustees, and finance and budget, where, the mutually agreed upon approach to how we were going to deal with that in as responsible a way as possible was to say, okay, well, as of last year's convention, we had a balanced 2023 preliminary budget that was approved by convention at the funding levels that, were in place at that time. We're going to go back to that budget with everything that it included, even if it was not sufficient, for any particular ministry's request, or it wasn't 100% of that request. We need to go back to that level as a starting point, unless there's, absolutely some kind of a, hard and fast commitment that we've made that would mean that we can't do that. And so for 2023, then that really is, there's not opportunity at this point to go back and forth with individual ministry line items.
All right, then let me ask one more question and then I will not take any more time. Is there a process by which prioritization is done so that there are certain ministries which must have their full asking, or that take priority over other ministries and organizations and committees and initiatives?
Well, I think some of the prioritization you've seen is in what Gary highlighted here. So for the items that were that were highlighted that are, different than the 2023 preliminary budgeted amounts. It's because there were prior commitments that were made. In the case of our mission congregations, those things, that process happens in the fall of the prior year, and the mission congregations have to be told, what their commitment is going to be for the following year by December 31st. So once we've made those commitments, we can't change those. We are committed to 100% for the Episcopal Church. So, which actually was a decrease this year. So that wasn't even an issue, but, moving through the other things that we had to really accommodate. Obviously we had a mandate for by last year's convention to create the position for the Canon Missioner for Black Ministries. We have overlap, we have 3 months worth of overlap with our bishops. We have a month and a half worth of overlap with 3 staff positions where people are retiring. So those are things that we really don't have, we don't really have a choice about. And those were mainly the things that you see were the big changes, from the 2023 budget.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I also wanted to, there's a couple of comments in the chat that I just wanted to highlight. And so Joan Mason asked, is there a document we can review that breaks down the mission congregations amounts last year versus the proposed for this year? There is a document that breaks down the mission congregation amounts that can be posted. It hasn't been, it typically hasn't been in the past, but that is something that that could be posted as part of the financial information, for review. We could certainly put that up in the, in the financial section for convention. So, Gary, we
Yes, I
can make
see
it.
Joan Mason saying, yes, please. I want to second that. Yes, please.
Yeah. And so Gary, we need to make a note of that. So we add that to our exhibits for the financial section. And we can
Okay.
get that schedule posted through Ann and Steve. So I also took note of Todd's comment, how fascinating that if every congregation paid their full marks of mission, we wouldn't have this additional draw from the trustee funds, and we could provide at least some COLA for diocesan staff. I appreciate the observation. The one qualification that I would make to it is that there would still be some additional draw over and above what typically comes off the trust funds as dividends, even if we did have the full mark submission giving. So I just want to be accurate about that, but I really do appreciate the spirit, of the comment that you made in that draw that we would have to take would be much less than the $1.3 million we're contemplating at this point in time, if we did have that. And so I do appreciate the spirit of that, and we are committed to continuing to work with congregations, on what we're all struggling with, which is sort of the root causes of the financial issues that all of us are experiencing, as we look for creative ways all over the place, whether it's use of property, all kinds of different ways that we have for for reinvigorating mission and ministry, in order to get at the sort of the root of what we need to be energized moving forward. So thank you. I see that Gary just posted his email in the chat as well. Thank you for that, Gary. Are there any other questions? So I note that Jeff Kirk posted an observation also in the chat. The 1.3 million shortfall is about 30% of our $4.3 million budget. The obvious place to look must be to reduce diocesan staff, noting the extra staffing during transition to a new bishop and the retirements of 3 diocesan staff persons. And, so I think, that is an issue that we'll be able to address in the conversations that will be upcoming in 2024. Since we are, the recommendation, and I had a bit of time there, Gary, where you were breaking up a little bit on my audio. Did you talk about our process for 2024?
Yes, I briefly talked about that. Basically, we didn't approve the 2024 budget, and we wanted the new bishop-elect to look at that with the overall community involvement, and look at our priorities and where we are going and where to cut or where to focus on, and to look at the budget much more holistically for 2024 to see where we go from here. And that will be towards the end of this in end of 2023. We'll have a special convention like we had between 2027 and 2017 and 2018, and we had a similar situation that 2017, I think the convention in 2018, we had a similar situation where we had to look at we looked at only the current year budget and the next year preliminary budget, and we did it on a special convention.
Right. So, and many of you who are here probably remember that process that we went through. And so from a procedural standpoint, just to clarify what to expect at the March convention, at the upcoming convention, is that, as you saw from Gary's screen share, we have prepared a 2024 preliminary budget that is balanced and has a lower level of shortfall than 2023 did, just because we don't have transition this time around. We don't have the overlap in staff positions this time around. So there's at least a portion of that goes away because of the because of the things that are not going to be occurring in 2024 that we had to deal with in 2023. Nevertheless, when it comes time for consideration of the 2024 preliminary budget, I'm not sure if it's going to be the bishop or someone will be however the procedure will work. There will be a motion made to defer consideration of the 2024 budget until a special convention to be held later on this year. So again, similar to that process that we just talked about in 2017, 2018. And then what will happen is we will go through a similar series of meetings, charrettes, conversations all across the diocese, because, when we talk about, where we need to make adjustments in the budget, whether it's staff or direct ministry, all of it impacts the level of resources that we're able to provide from a diocesan standpoint to our congregations. So in order for us to be able to, that's why we want to take the time to have the conversations so that everybody can be talking about priorities and what does that mean in terms of the adjustments that need to be made to the budget. So I'm sure, Jeff, that will come up during the course of those conversations, and that's where we'll have a chance to work through that. I think you can stop screen sharing too, Gary. That's fine. Thank you. Appreciate you putting that up. Other questions, observations? All right. Well, again, thank you so much for being a part of the pre-convention hearing. It's so valuable for us to be able to get information out to you. Hopefully you find it valuable in consideration, ahead of the convention, and then when we're on the convention floor. We definitely appreciate you taking the time to ask your questions and give us an idea of the concerns that you have. So thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thanks.